Who the hell are you? What do you do? Where do you live? What's your story?
So I'm Vic Dorfman. I'm the founder of MemberFix, co-founder of MemberHost, and we help people with their WordPress membership sites. We host their WordPress sites. And originally I'm from Ukraine, born in Ukraine. I grew up in the US since 4 years old. And about 2012, I came to Thailand without really any plan or money and just started trying to figure out what to do in terms of working online. And I was living in a hostel. Every morning I'd go down, get on the Wi-Fi, try to, see if I could do something for people, write an article, do some SEO, basically hustling. And then eventually I wound up building a membership site for myself, teaching keyword research for SEO. And somebody, I think one of our members, he said, Vic, I really like your site. Do you think you could build something like this for me? And I said, yeah, why not? Sure. So I built one for him. And I think he referred somebody else. And then I built one for them. And then it just kind of clicked that, wait a minute, there's really nobody who is doing membership sites as a niche or as a thing. And I think actually there were a few people, but it just seemed like a really interesting space and a really good angle that nobody had. And I really prefer to kind of be in my own little niche where I'm doing something that is kind of unique.
Hmm.
And that was, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. And we've just been doing that ever since. And I've been in Thailand since then. But yeah, that's where we met. That's where I met you. That's where we got to hang out and go on hikes and talk about all this deep stuff that we really enjoy talking about.
Well, how did you, I mean, obviously, if I said, how did you find Ray Chart? The answer is, well, we were friends. But how did you kind of came into Ray Chart a while ago now and went through some of the lessons, did some of the exercises. And like, how did you end up doing that? What inspired that move?
Mm. Well, at the time, I think an issue that I was dealing with was recognizing when a situation is threatening, and when a situation is uncomfortable, and learning to listen to my gut instinct and my intuition a little bit more. Because I think my tendency and the tendency of a lot of more cerebrally oriented people, which is a lot of people, a large percentage of people probably, is to start logically trying to figure out what's this person's agenda, what's on their mind, and even being empathetic to them and trying to understand them, put yourself in their shoes and so forth, rather than just listening to this highly attuned, evolved over millions of years mechanism that's warning you prior to your conscious brain even understanding what's going on. And even oftentimes it'll be much, much later that you'll logically understand, what transpired. And that could be in the context of dealing with certain types of people, maybe manipulative people, sociopathic, psychopathic people. It could be in the context of trusting yourself to not say something that you're going to regret later or not do something that you're going to regret later. So listening to your impulse, I know you're big on following your impulse, and just trusting that it's right rather than trying to do mental gymnastics about it. And so that led me to a number of different things. Meditation I've been doing for a while, and I was really interested in Rage Heart because it seemed very practical. Like you have, the first technique you learn is orienting, right? And it's just such an interesting thing because it's kind of the opposite of what you would want to do. You would want to, if you're in a situation which is uncomfortable or threatening, you kind of want to like close your eyes, go inside, take a deep breath, be like, I'm cool. But what you should probably actually do, and it even logically makes sense, is no, you should actually engage with your environment, acclimate to it, approach it courageously, whatever the situation may be. And it will probably diminish whatever sensations you might be feeling, anxiety, fear, apprehension. And so I just wanted to have more tools in my toolbox, right? I wanted to know about the orienting, the pendulation, all of these kinds of things that you teach in Rage Heart. And I was even telling my friends about some of the techniques. One of my friends was saying that, oh yeah, I have anxiety. I think we were walking on the beach and they're like, oh yeah, sometimes I just have this general vague anxiety, especially around a lot of people. And like here on the beach, I'm feeling kind of anxious. And I said, well, have you heard about orienting? And then I explained it to her and she thought, oh, that's really interesting. So that's how I got into Rage Heart.
Good stuff, man. You've unpacked. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, there's the part about, when it comes to dealing with difficult people, the tendency to think and logically try and understand the situation. And perhaps this is why we're friends, because I still do that quite a bit, but I certainly did it a lot more in the past. And I got myself into some very big trouble with some people in Thailand because I was listening to my mind and not my body, not my gut, not that feeling, that funny feeling that you're talking about. And then
Yeah.
there's the orienting, so looking around. And one thing I wanted to ask you is you're talking about that. Why do you think that works? Like, what is it about, meditation would be, let's sit down and close the eyes and sort of disappear into my own little world. And then this is, Rage Chart, this nervous system approach is more like, hey, no, keep your eyes open, look around, orient. Why do you think that works?
Well, I couldn't explain it to you in a technical sense because I don't have training in that area, but I could explain it maybe in a grandma wisdom, old world wisdom, common sense kind of way, which is that y- you have to face your fears and it diminishes them. You have to act with courage, and that doesn't mean that you go and jump off waterfalls, for example. Not that we would do such a thing, but it's a lot of micro decisions. It's a lot of small things. Like somebody, says something to you that's askew, you need to check them. It's a lot like dealing with a bully, and it's life is, trying you in different ways. And that's not to say that you need to be up in everyone's face, and looking for trouble, but it means that you need to cultivate an awareness of, and unfortunately, a lot of that stuff, like dealing with, with manipulative people, there's really no substitute for having these experiences that are arguably traumatic, however you define that word, but they stay with you and they bother you. It's like, how did I let that kind of thing happen? I also had some experiences with very, very manipulative people in Thailand. Not the same people, but in a different experience. And it's like you almost beat yourself up. Like, how did I even let that person finagle, get one over on me? But you got to remember that, like, if you're a fundamentally straightforward person and you've never sort of been taught that, there's a game that's being played and some people play it professionally, essentially, they're Machiavellian type people, then you don't know what to look out for. You're a white belt at that game. And you don't necessarily want to play that game yourself, but you want to be able to defend against people who would try to take advantage of you, or at least know what they're doing so that you could stay away from them. And so I think the reason it works is because you're confronting rather than evading. Who was it that said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I think that was Jung.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's almost a common sense thing in a way that escaping within yourself is, to be clear, I do think meditation, it has uses. I think it's useful, especially like in the morning and stuff, but I don't think the use case of meditation is to withdraw or dissociate from a situation. I think it's maybe in the morning, there's a lot of stuff going through your mind. You sit down, you chill out, you see the thoughts passing. You kind of get a bit of a mental witness, that observing ego, I think is what it's called in psychology. But that's to help you face the day rather than escape from it. So that's my layman's take.
Hmm. Interesting, man. Like what I'm hearing is, it's almost this facing things head on. Like shit can be going crazy during the day. There can be bad people around, and the eyes shut. There is like a use case for it, but it can also, depending on how it's used and how it's taught, depending on the teacher, it can be a way to evade or I mean, they call it spiritual bypassing. The idea that we're feeling something, and that we can use certain techniques to bypass and basically avoid it because it's uncomfortable or because it means there's some sort of difficult action that we may have to take, like confronting someone. And so it sounds like what you're saying is, with the eyes open, I'm just trying to paraphrase you. Of course, I know how I explain it, but it's always so interesting to find out how other people explain it when they've done it. So it sounds like with the eyes open, it's like it's harder to avoid the feeling. So if I'm feeling uncomfortable about someone or something, or if I'm having something come up in my body, my mind, it's harder to avoid it when my eyes are open somehow.
Mm. Yeah, what you just made me think of, JMac, is something I heard Wim Hof say, where he's like, when you go into a cold plunge, when you go into an ice bath, don't fight it. Don't tense up. Don't try to, fight with it or escape it. Well, you can't escape it. You're going to be fucking cold, right? But like the technique is to relax into it. So basically, like, relax into the discomfort kind of a thing. And I think it's similar. It's like orienting yourself in an environment that's unfamiliar or potentially threatening or whatever, especially if you have past trauma and you might be a little bit PTSD, or you might be like very sensitive to situations, so much so maybe that your fight or flight fires when it shouldn't. Then yeah, you're going to still feel those sensations. But if you can sort of get comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable and relax into it and say, well, this is just what it is right now, sit with it, as you told me once, then yeah, you'll be able to deal with it better. It's, yeah.
It's funny, man. Like what I'm thinking of now is like this feeling your feelings thing, which gets a lot of, I think it's sort of trendy right now to say that. You go on Instagram, feel your feelings, feel your emotions, cry, whatever. And, that's one camp. And then another camp is like, nah, it's bullshit. Like you shouldn't do that. That's making people weak, especially dudes weak, blah, blah, blah. And there's sort of there's two camps. But what I see is, I mean, there's nuance there. There takes maybe time to really understand the meaning or the
Yeah.
intelligence or the wisdom in that. But what I've found is this is what we're talking about, that there is so much power and so much strength and so much just self-understanding that comes with learning how to feel our feelings. It's not about wallowing in them and just like just like swimming in this swamp of our uncomfortable. Not about getting stuck there and feeling that shit all the time, but we're animals that have feelings for a reason. And so when we start to feel them, we learn how to really feel them without wallowing in them. It unlocks so much of what helps us with bad people. Because this is what we're getting to, is this manipulative, truly dangerous people, psychologically dangerous people, or even physically dangerous. It's the feelings that often tell us what we need to do, or that we're getting ourselves into trouble, that we're in danger. And so this is why, like, I tell people, man, this feeling your feelings thing, like, my goal with Rage Art is to make this shit sexy somehow, make it cool. And I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to get people to understand that it's not some weak, flimsy, soft thing. I mean, there's a softness to it, of course, but it's probably more like the softness of like a tree that can really bend and understand and work with the wind rather than breaking. So that's just what's coming up as I think about this feelings and how important it is and how much gold there is in that when we learn to do that.
I think it's very practical stuff because you can use these techniques, you could try them out, and if they work for you, they work, right? Well, it's subjective whether or not they work, but if you give it an honest try, and you do it for long enough in enough situations, orienting, pendulation, all that good stuff, you will have some more or less accurate, albeit subjective, idea of if this works, to what degree, in which situations is it sort of most useful, and if it doesn't work, cool, don't use it. If it does, great. You have one more tool in your toolbox.
Yeah. Well, how did it help you when we're talking about, manipulative people? I don't know how many details you want to share, but it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about that story and then how this stuff helped get you through that.
Yeah. So I won't go into the details, but I'll explain it in general terms of, as I said, some people are really good at being manipulative. And actually, it's kind of like marketing or sales, is if somebody's really good at sales, you don't feel that they're selling you. It doesn't feel like sales. Like the technique is hidden. It's very much the same, and really sales is a form of persuasion or manipulation. If depends on kind of the intention, I suppose. But these people know how to fly under the radar, and they have various methods of developing an asset, very much like what a CIA agent would do. Developing an asset, training them or rewarding them, for certain behaviors, withdrawing affection, withdrawing attention, using money, being seductive. There's, it could be men and women. And in this particular case, I think I basically just got seduced in a way, you could say, in a whole situation, but I just didn't. But like, to my own credit, I think at some point I realized, like, man, this person is really, really manipulative. And I don't think, by the way, being manipulative is either a positive or negative quality. I think it's intention. How do you use it? We're all serving our self-interest. So to a degree, we are all manipulating others, manipulating our external environment. It's a question of how it's done and what is the intent? What are the results of that? Actually, intent is overrated. It's what are the results of that? Interesting point. I'm sure you've read this before, but like manipulative, sociopathic, psychopathic people, they tend to be itinerant, meaning they'll go somewhere and they'll do their damage, and then they'll migrate somewhere else because they'll blow themselves out. They'll expose themselves eventually. Because if people aren't stupid, I mean, they might be naive, but they're not stupid. Eventually, they're going to be like, wow, this person's a fucking asshole. And then they're going to go and then they're going to, like a parasite, infect a healthy host tribe. So, yeah, and it just really shocked me that I didn't see it from the very beginning, that I didn't feel it from the very beginning. But I probably did, which is the whole thing. I probably felt these sensations and kind of just thought them away or rationalized them, or even worse, sometimes you're actively like you're an apologist for the person who's trying to take advantage of you. Like you're too empathetic. You're like, oh, wait, no, they're whatever. They've been through this. No, they're just trying to do this. It's like, but you're ignoring how you're feeling, or your sensations in your body. So it really was difficult for me to. It felt humiliating, basically, that I was like, how could I let this happen to me? Like, how did I not see this? I'm 30. I guess I was 37 at the time. I was like, I'm 37. I'm a grown man. How could I be so naive? But you can be. You can be. That's how you become not naive, is you go through now some people go through those situations earlier on. Maybe they've had manipulative family members or whatever, but whatever the case may be, that's what happened. And then I resolved to myself that I can never let this kind of thing happen again. Especially on that scale, there was a business situation that I was involved in a business. I can never let this happen again, neither on a large scale nor on a small scale. And the thing is, too, these types of people who are always basically, slick shit, if you want to call it that. There's like different archetypes, right? There's like the really smooth, seductive manipulator. There's kind of the bully who's basically testing your boundaries, trying to, give you a noogie or whatever. And like, as a grown man, right? If a man like comes and like, pats you in the head, you need to fucking check him right then and there. You can't let that kind of stuff slip. So it's almost like schoolyard rules, but for your life. And you don't have to be uh, like crazy about it or aggressive, but like you need to basically check situations before they get out of hand. And the thing about these types of people is that everything is done in baby steps if they're good at it. Right? It's not like all at once because yeah, that would light up your red flags right away. So I was like, man, I need more tools. I need to understand why this happened and I need to prevent it from happening. So rage heart was part of that. Testosterone, getting on testosterone was part of that. And then just reading a lot, looking at videos, analyzing the situation, analyzing my own tendencies. There were a few other smaller situations that cropped up where I just kind of let something slide that I probably shouldn't have. And I was like, man, this is something I need to deal with systematically and once and for all. And I would say I've more or less dealt with it, and I've um, more or less handled that problem. So that feels good because you know what? It's really it's not a good it's not a good thing to be like a grown man and to feel like fuck, do I trust myself to not to like to handle situations? Because I've proven that I could slip, right? Like it's like, do I, so, but then you have the experience, it kind of traumatizes you a bit, fucks you up a bit, and then you learn and you grow, all right? You could say it makes you a little bit callous. It hardens you, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you need the experience to know what's happening. And so that's the long story short.
Good stuff, man. I mean, I remember when I had my experience with people like this in Thailand. It was kind of, like you, I didn't realize this at the time, but I had like I describe it to myself like it's a funny feeling. Like they would say things and I'd be like, "Oh, I don't know about that." This feeling inside me would be like, oh, I don't know. And it was just like subtle enough where I could be like, it's just me, I'm just projecting. It's just my own issues with, I don't know, safety and trust and whatever. I just take 100% responsibility for what I'm feeling. I think it's some issue that I'm having instead of realizing that there are some bad people out there. And I didn't, I just rationalized it away, sort of explained it away for months. And it wasn't until I had a very, very strange and experiences. I've shared on this podcast before about taking mushrooms with them, and then they told me I'd killed millions of people in a past life, and that whole story. It's in episode 1 on the Rage Chart podcast. But that feeling that something's off was there long before I ever paid them any money, long before I committed to anything with them, and that was a big part of I think what brought me to the nervous system path, which is what I teach now at Rage Chart, because it's like I didn't realize just how essentially cut off from my own body, which maybe more precise way to say that would be I didn't realize how much I was cut off from feeling. Because I would have the feeling, I would be somewhat aware of the feeling, but I would explain it away, which I think is what a lot of people do. Another example that I thought of is another cue. I don't know, I grew up in a Christian family, so it's kind of like turn the other cheek, all the Bible stories about being loving and turn the other cheek, all this sort of stuff. And there's a lot of good there, some value there, some wisdom there. This brings value to society. But I think it can also create this situation where I might not like someone. And instead of paying attention to the fact that I don't like, there is a reason that I don't like them. Now, it might be that I have some issue with them. They trigger something in me. That's always a possibility. But sometimes I think we just don't like people because we're picking up on something and we might not be able to logically say what that is, but there is something there. I've noticed it with women when I've been dating, where it's like, I'll pick the most trivial things and be like, I don't like them because of their whatever. I don't want to be specific things. I'm like, why does this bother me? It seems like such a non-issue. And yet how I'm understanding it is like on some intuitive level, I'm like, this is not for me. But I can't, there's no story for that. It's the old copywriting marketing thing of you buy an emotion and justify with logic. So I've got an emotion or a feeling of like, this is not good for me. And because my mind needs a logical way to explain it, it'll find the most trivial, seemingly trivial things to explain the feeling. And I sort of realized, okay, maybe it's not about that specific thing. It's just there is some sort of intuitive, non-verbal perception of something that maybe I'll never even know what it is, but I'm picking up on something. And this person is bad for me at least, and I might not like them. And so that's been a cue for me, is kind of, if I don't like someone, it's okay. I don't have to try to like them or be more loving or anything like that. If I don't like them, listen. At the very least, pay attention. That's sort of been what it is. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be right all the time, but paying attention to those feelings of the things that are less socially acceptable. Like, I don't like this person. And kind of going, oh, that's interesting. Okay, let's tune into that. Let's just watch this person, like don't rush into anything too big, So, yeah, man.
100%. 100%, bro. It's definitely a thing where I'll see someone or I'll interact with someone briefly. I could be there alone, or I might be there like with my wife or something. Like I've said this, I just recall saying this to my wife many times, like, I don't like that fucking guy. I just don't, I mean, there is a reason. It might be vague in the beginning. I've gotten pretty good at like feeling it and then like explaining it, understanding why I don't like it. Like because it's very complex. Somebody exhibits some kind of weird body language, or they do some little thing, and you have to almost like Sherlock Holmes, reverse chronologically explain the chain of reasoning of what that means. But if your reasoning is defensible, and somebody is like a rational person, they'll be like, I see what you're saying. But your emotion told you that way before you put it together. And sometimes I see somebody, I'm like, I don't like this guy's fucking face. And I'm just like immediately on guard for this person. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and sometimes I'm proven wrong, but rarely. Like usually and you know what? People have that reaction to you too, for their own reasons, and that's totally fine. But that's their bag.
There was I think one of the first, I did a diet, which is sort of like a ayahuasca retreat, but a bit more intense or longer, deeper, that kind of thing. I remember during this diet, it's 2 weeks, you fast for 5 days, you do 4 ayahuasca ceremonies. And a lot of the way these plants work is they seem to really, at least the way I've been doing it here, is they seem to excel at finding stuff in us that is not serving us, and they bring it to the surface. And part of the way it comes out is it passes through our consciousness. So during this diet, I was thinking about someone else, a really good friend now, but at the time I was thinking, man, he really should not have said that. Like I was thinking about all the reasons this guy is fucked. And I'm like, he shouldn't have said that. That was really rude. That was really irresponsible. And I was spending hours, days on this, thinking about all the ways this guy was not helping me. And the day the diet closed, it was gone. Like all of that had just evaporated. And I didn't realize it when I was spending all my time thinking about him. But afterwards, this is just to share the flip side of it. Afterwards, I was like, I think that was just my own issue. This is an example of the flip side of like my own projection or my own, I have a problem with this guy, but maybe that's not actually helping me. I'm projecting, or he's stirring up he's pushing a button in me. And so it got cleaned out. The end of this retreat, diet finished, and it was gone. I was like, oh, that was just my stuff. And then since then, this is a couple of years ago now, since then he's become a really, really, really good friend. I trust him more than most people these days. He's just been fantastic. So that's just to share the flip side. Sometimes, I remember a time I was out at dinner with some family in Sydney, and this guy, I found myself all of a sudden getting pissed off at this dude at the table. He was telling stories about, I don't know, monks in Thailand or something, and they were off in the jungle, all these stories like that. I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. Let me ask some more questions. because I'm intrigued. I'm interested. He was a good storyteller. So I ask him some questions, and he's like, no, you're not ready for that. Like sort of this creating this dynamic of he's up here and I'm down here, and I'm going to have to work to win his approval, so then he can so generously dish out whatever this story was. And as soon as it took me a few minutes, but I started getting angry. I'm like, what's going on? Why am I getting angry at this dude? At some point, I'm like, because he's fucking with you. He's trying to fucking twist in and manipulate you and create these little subtle power dynamics so he can validate himself. Once I realized that, it was like, oh, okay, cool. I just backed right off, stopped asking questions, stopped playing the game. And so there's this and this is the beauty of this stuff, is you'll feel it when someone's messing with you long before you figure it out mentally. Which is why feeling your feelings is such a critical piece.
Yeah. When you were describing your experience there on the ayahuasca ceremony, I guess this is not the case, but it made me think, well, maybe that was a case where you're feeling resentful at yourself for allowing somebody to say something that's not cool and not checking them. Because I don't know, maybe this is just me, but if I let something slide and I shouldn't, which you almost never should. I mean, I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying get confrontational with people and get like in everyone's grill and fucking start fights and whatever. But I'm kind of saying that. I'm kind of saying like you can't let anybody get away with any shit. And well, and again, it's contextual, right? But like, okay, if we're talking about in the context of men, it depends where in the world you are. Like, you can't really do this in every country. But if a guy tries you, like, you could basically say, okay, cool, you wanna handle it, and see if he's like willing to go there. Because that actually, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you've been in fights when you were in high school and stuff. Like, you hate this guy. This guy fucking hates you. And then you go and you fight it out. And then you're like best buddies afterwards. Why? This is like the weirdest thing ever. But it's almost like, yeah, there's a power dynamic that's you're battling for dominance. Or this person's just a fucking dick. But whatever is the case, it's like, no, bro, like you're not gonna. But, obviously that's the last resort. It's better to be slick about it and just, like check them in some kind of way. If it's with women, it's different. You can essentially just say no and walk away, and that's that. And really, I mean, I think the best policy with these kinds of people is to like sniff them out and stay away from them. But you can't always do that. Sometimes you're in a situation where you're dealing with people you don't like, and that comes back to being courageous, feeling your feelings, or I don't even like the word feelings, but like feeling the sensations, right? Because feelings has a connotation of being frou-frou and whatever, but like just sensations in your body that you're anxious, or your heart rate has gone up, or you're clenching your fist, or your jaw is getting tight. It's like, why am I in fight or flight? That's because this guy gave me like a look that's like, pissing me off, or this girl, she said something that's like subtly embarrassing you in front of some people, which is completely like unacceptable. So it could be so many different things, but if you sense it and then you address it, and maybe not then and there necessarily, but ideally then and there, check it, you have no cause to resent yourself. Because even if everything blows up in your face and maybe you get your ass kicked or your relationship melts down, at least you didn't betray yourself. At least you're like, well, I fucking stood up for myself, essentially, is what it comes down to. So yeah, man, I mean but I guess that wasn't the case with this dude. But yeah, people try shit, man. Like all the time. Even as a grown man, you think you're past that. You think people are past that. They're not. They're actually playing for bigger stakes.
I mean, it's funny, man. Like, yeah, like some of this work with these plants, it can be very different. Depends on the person who's running the ceremony or the retreat. They all have sort of a different way of approaching things. And just this one guy that I work with, his sort of approach can be very like stirring the pot. Like finding your buttons and pushing on them. And you do get manipulative people who are trying to, manipulate you and control you, who do that. They try and do it for their advantage. And coming into plant work, coming into doing like one of these ceremonies, it seemed to me at the time, I'm like, I don't know how this is helping, because I don't have the context for what's really going on. It just seems like he's just saying stuff. I don't really get it. And it was after that ayahuasca retreat where I'm like, oh, I see what's happening. I know why he's doing this now. It's not because he's trying to just mess with me. He's not trying to like make me feel bad just to make me feel bad. He's not trying to get me to do something that he wants me to do. Part of this process is very different to like traditional therapy. Even the culture right now in the West is all about making sure everyone feels safe, that no one feels like their buttons ever get pushed. Everyone's like, it's so silly. Everyone becomes so weak, and so like they're so reactive. They have no ability to withstand a bit of like someone pushing their buttons. So with these plants, like a lot of what's behind these buttons is energy. So if this guy comes in, he starts telling me something or pushing on one of these buttons in a ceremony with, say, San Pedro or even ayahuasca, it brings that stuff up, whatever's behind that button. And then if I engage with it in the right way, it'll come out, and then it will cease to be a trigger or a button. And then in the future, when I go out into the world, a real manipulative person comes along and tries to use it, but it's just not there anymore. It's just like, I see what you're doing. Like that button does not exist. And so there's this, and this depends on the person that you're working with, but this really good friend of mine now, like once I finally understood the context, it was like, oh, I see. So the best thing I can do in that situation is allow it to happen, which is, not having my defenses up too much, and also not being too relaxed. But, sort of, it's a bit of a tangent, but just being in this space where it's like allowing the buttons to get pushed without getting caught up in them. And then it really does translate into life, because there's less buttons, less triggers, less shit there for people to pull on and push on.
Mm. It almost sounds like it's a bit of a sandbox for you it's almost like a practice session in a way for you to see the kinds of things that people try. They're doing it intentionally, but you trust them. Ideally, they're trustworthy. And it's like, after it's all said and done, you just had like a practice run, but no harm done, lesson without the scar kind of thing.
Jiu-jitsu, man, it's just like, so this guy, he teaches a black belt, I've been training with him for 2.5 years now, and it's like the similarities between plant medicine work with really well done plant medicine work, like ayahuasca or San Pedro with good teachers, is so similar to jiu-jitsu. Because what happens in jiu-jitsu is it's like you're, depending on how you're rolling or who you're rolling with, but the idea is, you would know this, like you're rolling and you're literally triggering in a controlled environment the fight or flight response, or like the survival response. So instead of being in like a life-threatening situation where you might get stabbed, you go to this dojo or this school where you go and learn how to fight. And when you roll, you got people who are basically trying to kill. They wouldn't kill you, but they're choking you, where they could choke you unconscious and literally kill you if they just held on for 2 or 3 minutes or however long the time is. And so what ends up happening, you do jiu-jitsu, I see it in myself, like I'm like, I'll get pissed off. I get like a bit nervous, a bit afraid, or someone's smothering you, and you start to freak out. Same idea, right? It's like you're using like the tool of jiu-jitsu to elicit these buttons, or to push on these buttons, these responses that people have, and then learning to stay calm, because you realize if I freak out right now, if I go crazy, I'm going to gas out, I'm going to lose. So it's like, all right, how can I be in this? How can I learn to engage with this intense feeling, with this trigger, with this anger or this fear or whatever's there, without getting caught up in it, while still rolling, executing technically really, really well, staying calm, managing my energy and my breath. It's all the same thing, man. It's been the most fascinating thing for me to come here to Peru, to be doing jiu-jitsu and psychedelics alongside like rage art, all the nervous system stuff, because it's all the same thing. Rage art is the same. It's like creating practices to get someone to feel more, and then either with other practices or just life comes in, pushes those buttons, stuff comes up, it gets let go, and then over time you get it from jiu-jitsu. It's like you become better, you become stronger, much harder to mess with. A lot of those buttons are just gone. You just calm, you just relax. Because even like I was talking to this guy about Hicks and Gracie one day, and he was talking about he's met Hicks and Gracie I think once or a couple of times. He's like, he's the only person he's ever met where he could feel this dude's presence in the room. Something about like he was just the truth, 100% embodied himself. And I just thought it was such a beautiful thing. And he's like, yeah, he's lived all the what ifs. He's done all the stuff that, hey, what if this happens? What if that? He's done it all. So it's like now nothing. There's nothing there to like, there's nothing there to push. There's no button. So, and it seems like you can get there with jujitsu. You can do it with, it's all these different practices for doing it. So anyway, man.
It's kind of like what we were talking about in one of our voicemails to each other, where well, like what we're talking about is essentially like building capacity, right? Building capacity to deal with stress in a systematic way. And I think I said something to you like, is it possible to, and I think it was in the context of some people come into this plant medicine community and they're like, they've never done anything. They've never earned any fucking money. They've never been in a fight. They don't have a family. They haven't done anything meaningful or difficult, really. Uh, but they're getting this wisdom from the plants that's teaching them X, Y, and Z. But it's like that to me is spiritual bypassing to the max because you haven't done anything in your life, so you have no wisdom. You have nothing to reflect upon, really. And it's like the idea of building capacity, but having no real life adversity, it's contradictory. And I'm not saying that like, okay, if you've never done anything, it can't teach you anything. I think I remember when I was in high school, speaking of manipulative people, this is maybe one of the most manipulative people I've ever met. This guy was a friend of mine. And then I think it was on one of our birthdays, we took LSD together. It was maybe my first time taking LSD. And for some inexplicable reason that night, I got it into my head that I need to tell this guy that I'm not going to hang out with him anymore. And I did. And I told him, I was like, hey, man. And I couldn't explain it. I couldn't understand it. But in retrospect, it was very easy to understand. He was very, very manipulative and just not a good friend, not a good person. I was like, I can't be friends with you anymore. And he had a really kind of funny response that vindicated me. He's like, well, I don't agree. I was like, you don't have to agree, bro. But that's such a typical like fucking narcissist reply. Another thing I wanted to mention because it's apropos to Rage Heart and everything. I think I told you this story before too. When I was in college, I had a roommate who's an older guy who he was a psychology major and he'd gone through, I think, like a master's program in psychology. So he had this awesome library of books about pop psychology, academic psychology, psychiatry, self-help, all this stuff. And one day I picked up one of his books called Healing the Shame That Binds You. And I don't remember all of the stuff in there. Bradshaw, I think, is the author. Michael Bradshaw, I believe. And it had this thing where it said, like, grab a pillow or wait until no one's around and just smash the pillow, freak out, yell, almost like, primal scream therapy, and just whatever is bothering you about whoever it's bothering you about, project it onto them and flip out and beat them and kill them symbolically and whatever. And I just did that. And I flipped out about all the people, family, whoever that, I needed to. And I felt so relieved. I felt it was like off my chest. I was like, wow, I didn't know all that was in there, but it was fucking in there. And it's so, and I think I saw like the other day, I saw like a TikTok and a dude or it was like an Instagram post, and the guy was playing a clip of these women in the forest screaming and like hitting things and stuff. And he was like mocking it and saying, see, this is what's wrong with the world today and this and that. And I thought, yeah, I know what he's trying to say, but like, no, man, that's really healthy to do that. And like I get it, they're paying. Are their lives really that hard? I get like the social commentary, whatever, but it's like, no, man, these are modalities, these are techniques in the jujitsu of life. And there's a time and a place, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. And so whatever works is fine, like do that.
It's funny, like, like talking about like chicks in the forest, like beating stuff up. I don't know, waving sticks, whatever they were doing, and like, oh, their lives aren't that hard. Probably true, but but it's interesting. Like I think when
Relative
your life is
to
hard,
sub-Saharan Africa. Or,
yeah. But then at the same time, I'm like, if you were in Africa or your life is really hard, you don't actually have time to feel much. You're too focused on survival and just making enough money to survive, to get by, or to go hunting if you live in Africa, I guess. I think it's when, like, that's why in our culture, I wonder how much of this, stuff starts coming up when there's space for it. So, well, we have our food and shelter covered, we have some good relationships. That's when the body's like, okay, now you're ready for all this anxiety. Now we can start to give you all this stuff which you haven't had space or time or for generations to feel or to focus on. So it's tricky. I think life can be really good, and then yet in that creates a sort of space or capacity for all kinds of stuff to start to arise, because it's like, well, now you've got room for it. Now you've got space for it. So I can totally see why wealthy white women could be in the jungle processing trauma. So I also loved
for sure.
what you said about, there's feelings. Yeah, that can sound a bit like, I don't know about that. It's also sort of vague. Like, what even is a feeling? Whereas sensations, which is a lot more of what it's about. Because when someone says, I feel angry, you're like, okay, what does that feel like? They're like, well, I don't know. I'm just angry. I'm pissed off at whoever. And it's like, that's not a feeling. That's a thought. The feeling is the heat or the tightness that you feel in your chest, or that sort of like, sort of that sharp pain right on the right side of your abdomen, the way your shoulders start to tense up just a little bit, like just almost in the fascia, or the jaw as that sort of holds a little bit. Like, these are sensations. That's feelings. But I suppose when you say feelings, most people are like, what the fuck does that even mean? So, one other thing that I wanted to ask about is, we haven't talked much about it yet, is testosterone. Because before we chatted, we were talking about how, like, you can meditate, you can do rage art, you can do all these different practices. But if you got low testosterone, all this other stuff, it might help a little bit, but it's still going to be a bit of a challenge. It's not going to fix things necessarily.
Yeah, that's a really well. Okay, so this is more for men, but women, by the way, women do also do TRT. I don't know if people know that they do testosterone replacement therapy. A woman can be deficient in testosterone, same as a man, or in estrogen or progesterone or any number of very key hormones. But I can only speak to my experience, where I started testosterone replacement therapy about a year ago. And the funny thing is, speaking of feeling your feelings and kind of trusting your body, is prior to doing that, I had done a lot of research, I read a lot, and I went and also did all my blood work. And my blood work came back that my testosterone was 800 something, and which is well within range. It's actually in the high end of the range. Everything else looked pretty good. And so on paper, and if I had gone to a doctor in the West, they'd be like, no, you're not a candidate for TRT. You don't need this. Like, if you go to like the Reddit pundits, they'd be like, oh yeah, you don't need it. You're good. You're good, bro. But see, I knew, and I've been living in my body my whole life. I knew that my recovery had become a lot worse. I had like crazy brain fog. Could be a lot of things that caused that for sure. But I reasoned, look, I'm going to go on TRT eventually anyway, sooner rather than later, especially if I want to keep training. If you're doing jujitsu 5 days a week, your body takes a fucking beating, man. You know, and I was like, if I'm going to keep doing this and lifting weights, and I have a family, and I'm an entrepreneur, might only sleep 6 hours, some nights, most nights. And I'm like, well, like, I need help. Like, and I'm willing to take the trade-off of going on steroids. So knowing that, I said, okay, well, fuck it. I'll just do it. And if it doesn't work out, or if I have a bad reaction or whatever, I'll just come off it, because you can come off it. So I got on, and initially you go through kind of what's called like a honeymoon phase, where you're just feeling really awesome all the time. But then it kind of evens out, and then you're at your baseline. But for sure, several things vis-a-vis what we're talking about became apparent. Number one, you start to think clearer. So if I had brain fog that I wouldn't say it completely resolved, but it vastly improved. It was tangible, the improvement. So if you're thinking more clearly, your brain is working better. It stands to reason that you're going to be more effective in sort of all areas of your life. And the other thing, and a lot of people report on this, if you go, it's always interesting to like go online and read people before and after, like, hey, before going on TRT, this is how I felt, this is how I behaved. Then I went on TRT, this is how I felt, looked, and behaved. And a lot of people say, oh, I've become a lot more assertive. I don't take shit. I used to be a pussy and, my wife stepped all over me now. Like, I run the house with an iron fist or, that was never an issue. But like, basically, you do become more assertive. And it's like that begs a question. It's like, okay, you're more assertive. Does that mean that you're better able to perceive threats? Is there a nervous system component? I don't know. I'm just asking the question. But testosterone acts on virtually every system in the body. And in a nutshell, like the long story short is that, yeah, it absolutely makes you more in tune with stuff. And maybe it's because like it's something about testosterone where you're competing in a dominance hierarchy. It makes you more competitive. It also, funny enough, it made me want to hang out with other people more, maybe more of a social butterfly. Whereas prior to it, I was kind of like, I don't want to deal with these people. I don't want to talk with anybody. I just kind of come do my thing, work out, leave. But then I was like in the mix. I was like, I want to talk with people. I want to shoot the shit, I want to compete, in the hierarchy. So it's just really interesting. Those are kind of the big things, but there's a lot of little subtle things that are very difficult to explain unless you've felt them. So it's just, I would say in terms of regulating the body, regulating the nervous system, yeah, that's one thing. One thing I didn't read about that completely blew me away and surprised me, this is my favorite testosterone benefit, could be unique to me, I don't know, but it made me so calm. And I would say if I were to describe the effect in some kind of technical way, I would say it has an anti-neurotic effect, especially if, as in my case, you have maybe some kind of tendency towards a more neurotic disposition, maybe because of how you grew up, your upbringing, whatever. But it kind of stands to reason, right? Like when you think of a man who's a man's man, you think of a calm, strong guy who doesn't take crap from anybody, but he's also not acting like a bitch or up in everyone's face picking a fight. He's calm, strong, a rock, right? When you think of a guy who's not that, you think he's in his feelings all the time. And I don't mean in his sensations, I mean in his feelings, like uh, reactive, um, getting upset easily, getting bent out of shape about everything. So it's like all of these things came together, and I was like, wow, I'm never going to come off testosterone. And I think, so just to wrap that up, basically, I think in my case, on paper, it looked like everything was cool, but I knew it probably wasn't. And then when I finally got on it, I was like, it wasn't cool. Like, there's a vast difference. And even like my face changed, my voice changed, the way that I conduct myself. You get obviously put on muscle and stuff. And all of these things are interconnected. If you feel good about the way you look, if you feel good about the way you present yourself, it's going to feed into everything else. Everything's connected, but it definitely has some kind of positive effect on regulating your, if you want to call it nervous system, or just regulating your ability to deal with stressful situations is also greatly improved. It's just like, I'm very passionate about this topic because I think there's a lot of misinformation about it and a lot of bro science. And yeah, it fucking rocks. What can I say?
Do you find, I mean, like, I'm not on testosterone, but when I think about it, it sounds great. Like, the benefits sound pretty cool. I'm curious about, are there there one thing to me is like I just don't like having to rely on something. So if I had to like, get some sort of injection or pill, or I don't know how it works, but if I had to do that like every week or every 2 weeks without fail, or there was going to be some pretty serious like drops in testosterone and then mood, side effects with my mood, like I find that that makes me nervous. The idea that I would then be relying upon that, would have to take that, once a month would probably be all right, because a month is pretty spread out. Like I'm thinking, what if I want to go camp? Not that I do this ever, but if I wanted to go camping for 2 weeks in the wilderness, like I wouldn't want to have to, take a little esky, a little ice box with a syringe full of testosterone in it. So I'm curious, is that even true? Like I haven't researched this. That's just where my mind goes. Is like I don't want to be reliant on this where I have to take it really regularly.
Yeah, a few people brought that up because I made a video for my YouTube channel where I talked about my before and after experience with TRT, and it got, I don't know, like 20,000 views or something, and I posted on my socials, and like friends were like hitting me up and saying, "Hey Vic, well what about this?" And that was one of the questions, is like how often do you inject it? And I said every day. You don't have to do it every day, but I that's just my preference. And they're like, "Oh, it's like for forever, for the rest of your life, I'm gonna have to do that?" And I'm like, this is what I say. I say, bro, once you're on testosterone and you feel what it feels like to, assuming that you were suboptimal before, like assuming that the change is as dramatic for you as it was for me, it might be even more dramatic because I was already working out, I was already doing everything right. But if you're a fat sack of shit who just eats Cheetos all day and then you take testosterone and turn your life around, you're gonna feel like $1 million. Like you're gonna feel amazing. And I'm like, bro, when you're on testosterone, you're gonna feel so good. You're gonna be like, you're not gonna think, do I have, oh fuck, I have to pin every day. You're gonna be like, I get to feel awesome every day. Give me the fucking needle. It only takes 30 seconds anyway. Like it's no big deal. And it's some bitch shit. Like no offense, but like it's like basically like, dude, do you want to feel like the man? Do you want to feel like the man or not? Like it's just a little injection. It takes 30 seconds. What's the big deal? You spend more time than that fucking making your coffee.
Fair enough. Oh, interesting. Cool. Well, on that note, how would you explain rage heart
No factor.
to your friends?
Yeah, so
How do
rage
you explain
heart
it?
is, I would explain it as yeah, so I view it as like a toolbox of practical techniques to help you do life a little bit better and to deal with situations better, to be a little bit more resilient and have some more capacity through these different techniques. Yeah, I think it's just a really nice toolbox to have. I still use that stuff to this day because I think I was in Rage Heart what, like 6, 7 months ago, something like
Uh
that.
huh.
But like still to
Uh huh.
this day, I come into a new environment. First thing I do is orient.
Hmm. Good stuff, man. I can see you doing it right now. That's what's been, I think about these tools. It's been 4.5 years for me using them. It's like, what's so cool about it is I'm like, there's very few things that I use every single day throughout my day when I fall asleep at night. Like it's the kind of thing that once it's integrated, it becomes a part of you. It's like how did I live? Well, for me, I think about, man, how did I live my life without this? How the hell do people get through life without these tools? Because I'm like, life is, for me, I find like life is challenging enough. There's stress, there's things that go wrong. Life is hard enough with like I feel like I've got some incredible like world class tools for managing stress, managing how I'm feeling, my sensations, and yet it's still challenging. And so I think about, man, this is why I started raging. I'm like, how the hell do people get through their lives without this stuff? They don't have this. Some people, they don't meditate, they don't journal, they don't have all of that. And this, for me anyway, the rage art stuff it blew everything else out of the water. I'm like, it's a game changer. It was for me anyway. Just how much it's such a part of my day to day now. Do you use it with jujitsu?
Mm, no, not really.
Uh,
But you know, I think after I finished Rage Heart, you added a bunch of more content. So maybe I need to resubscribe and go through everything from start to finish again because I do feel like I gave it a pretty I got a lot out of it, but I feel like I could have given it a little bit more attention and gotten more out of it. So maybe I'll do that.
cool, man. Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on to talk about some stuff. Hopefully, some interesting stuff for the person listening to this. If they're still listening, if people are, you mentioned a YouTube channel. If people want to learn more about you, I mean, this is not a business podcast, so I don't know how many people I can send you that want membership websites. But if people do want to learn more about you, whether it's your YouTube channel or they do want a membership site or something like that, where are the best places for them to do that?
Yeah, I reckon the best place would probably be go to Instagram, and my name is Vic, Vic underscore Dorfman, Dorf as in Frank, Man, Vic underscore Dorfman. And yeah, you can chat with me there. All the links to my stuff are there. You can see some jujitsu. Yeah,
Fantastic, man. I'll have links to that in the show notes at RageHeart. If you want to learn more about RageHeart, it's like Braveheart, but rage. Like you're punching that pillow. RageHeart.co, where there'll be links to the podcast and other information about how to get started on the nervous system path. So thanks for coming on the show, Vic.
yeah, man. Shit, you know what we should have talked about?